Chapter 1. Aralynn. Secretly training. The abandoned wing of Solara's grand palace stood in eerie silence, a hidden enclave frozen in time. Once a hub of opulence and celebration, its gilded chandeliers and ornate mirrors were now cloaked in cobwebs and layers of dust. Faded tapestries, their threads dulled with age, sagged limply against cold stone walls. The faint flickering glow of torches cast dancing shadows across the vast expanse of what had once been a magnificent ballroom. It was here that Princess Aralynn Solwyn, heir to the throne of Solara, lived her double life. Day after day in the palace above, Aralynn felt herself suffocating under layers of silk, protocol, and expectation. Every meal, every lesson, every public appearance reminded her that she was meant to be a delicate ornament for the throne, not the warrior she secretly burned to become. The frustration had been building for months, pushing her to sneak away night after night despite the bruises and exhaustion. Dressed not in the silken gowns befitting a princess, but in a simple tunic and trousers, Aralynn squared her shoulders and gripped the hilt of her training sword. Her pink hair, usually cascading down her back in elegant waves, was tied into a tight braid that swung as she moved. Across from her, Uncle Varric stood with a stern expression. His grizzled features bore the marks of countless battles, scars crisscrossing his weathered face like a roadmap of his past. His armor creaked softly as he shifted his stance, raising his practice blade. "Focus, Aralynn," Varric commanded, his gravelly voice reverberating through the empty hall. "You're too rigid. Combat is fluid. Adjust to your opponent." She attacked first and missed badly. Varric's parry sent her spinning. She tried again, too eager, blade too high, and he disarmed her in 2 moves. The sword clattered loudly. Heat burned her cheeks. "Again," Varric barked, his tone firm but not unkind. "This time, let your instincts guide you. Don't think, feel." Aralynn tightened her grip, determination glinting in her cerulean eyes. She lunged forward, her blade slicing through the air with a metallic whistle. Varric parried effortlessly, his blade connecting with hers in a sharp clang that echoed like thunder. The force of the deflection sent her stumbling backward. She tried 3 more times, each failure sharper than the last. Her muscles screamed. Doubt whispered that she would never be more than the pampered princess everyone expected. Still, she pushed on. The clang of steel echoed through the hall as Aralynn attacked again, her movements more fluid and deliberate. The torches flickered, casting their sparring shadows across the walls, and for a brief moment, the abandoned ballroom felt alive once more. Aralynn's braid whipped behind her as she feinted left and struck right, her blade connecting with Varric's in a shower of sparks. She grinned despite the sweat trickling down her brow. Finally, Varric disarmed her with a deft twist of his wrist, her sword clattering to the floor. But he smiled, a glint of pride in his eyes. "You're improving. One day, you might even best me." Aralynn laughed, brushing dust from her trousers. "Only if you're kind enough to slow down for me, Uncle." Varric chuckled, sheathing his blade as he stepped closer. "Kindness has its place, but not here. Out there, kindness gets you killed. You've got to be quicker, sharper, smarter, and you will be. You're a natural, just like your mother was." Aralynn's smile faltered briefly, a hint of vulnerability crossing her features. "Do you really think I'll be ready?" she asked softly, the weight of her secret life pressing down on her. Varric rested a hand on her shoulder, his expression uncharacteristically gentle. "You'll be more than ready. You've got the fire of a warrior, Aralynn, and the heart of a queen. That's a rare combination. Don't ever doubt it." The warmth in his words made her chest tighten, and for a moment, the abandoned ballroom felt less cold. Varric had always been more than just her uncle. He was her confidant, her mentor, and in many ways the father she'd always wanted, but never truly had. King Hadrian, though respected, had always been distant, his focus consumed by matters of state. "I wouldn't be half the swordswoman I am without you," she said earnestly. "Thank you, Uncle, for everything." Varric's gruff demeanor softened further. "It's my honor, Aralynn. You've got a spark, and it's my job to make sure it doesn't go out." He stepped back, his stern mask slipping back into place. "Now, again." This time, show me you can fight like the future queen you're destined to be." She grinned, her resolve renewed. "With pleasure." Unbeknownst to them, a shadow shifted in the far corner of the hall. The faintest echo of footsteps lingered before fading into the darkness. Someone was watching. Chapter 2. Sneaking out of the palace. The palace of Solara, with its glittering spires and sprawling gardens, seemed impenetrable to those who gazed upon it from the bustling city below. For its inhabitants, however, the labyrinthine halls and golden corridors could feel more like a gilded cage than a fortress of security. For Princess Aralynn, that cage was one she was determined to escape, if only for a few precious hours. Nightfall had blanketed the kingdom in a velvety darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of lanterns scattered across the city of Solara. Dressed in a plain brown dress and hooded cloak, Aralynn moved with practiced precision through the palace corridors. Her soft leather boots made barely a whisper against the polished marble as she navigated her secret route. Her heart thudded in her chest, not with fear, but with excitement. Her path took her to an unassuming bookshelf at the end of a narrow hallway. Glancing over her shoulder to ensure she was alone, Aralynn pressed her fingers against a loose brick hidden in the wall. With a soft click, the bookshelf shifted, revealing a concealed passage. The princess slipped inside, pulling the lever to seal the entrance behind her. The air grew cool and damp as she descended the winding staircase, her lantern's faint golden glow illuminating moss-covered walls and the occasional scurrying insect. She couldn't help but shiver at the damp chill and the eerie echoes of her footsteps. At the bottom of the staircase, she emerged into the palace gardens, their towering hedges and vibrant flowers whispering in the night breeze. The scent of jasmine and fresh earth filled her nose, a sharp contrast to the stifling opulence of the palace interiors. Aralynn smiled to herself as she made her way to a concealed gate, skillfully picking the lock she'd practiced on so many times before. Her hands shook slightly, not from nerves, but from the thrill of freedom. Beyond the gate lay the sprawling city of Solara, alive with the hum of late-night activity. Merchants peddled their wares under the soft glow of lanterns, musicians played lively tunes, and the scent of fresh bread and roasted meats drifted through the air. The princess pulled her hood lower to conceal her face as she stepped into the lively streets, blending seamlessly into the crowd. As she moved through the narrow alleys and bustling marketplaces, her thoughts turned to them. She had felt eyes on her back twice tonight, once near the garden gate and again in a shadowed alley. But when she turned, nothing was there. Her destination was clear: the Rusty Flagon Tavern. A chaotic haven of raucous laughter, clinking tankards, and the occasional brawl, it was a place where Aralynn could shed her royal identity and revel in the freedom she so desperately craved. More importantly, it was where she would meet her friends. Reaching the tavern, Aralynn slipped inside, greeted by the familiar cacophony of noise and the warm scent of spiced cider. She spotted Lyric lounging at a corner table, his boots propped up on the edge as he flipped a coin idly between his fingers. Kyle sat beside him, arms crossed and an exasperated expression on his face as he watched Lyric's antics. Era was already tending to a small wound on a patron's arm, her gentle touch and soft smile putting the man at ease. Aralynn made her way over to them, pulling back her hood. Lyric's eyes lit up as he caught sight of her vibrant pink hair. "Ah, you've finally decided to join us," he teased, his tone full of mock exasperation. He gave her an exaggerated bow. "We are but humble mortals, blessed by your presence." Kyle rolled his eyes and shoved Lyric's shoulder lightly. "Enough, Lyric. She's here, and we've got more important things to talk about." Despite his gruff tone, his face softened as he glanced at Aralynn. "You made it safe. That's all that matters." "What took you so long?" Kyle asked, his deep voice tinged with concern. He subtly shifted his chair so he could watch the tavern door while facing her. "The usual," she replied with a shrug. "Slipping through tight places and avoiding trouble has become an art form." Era glanced up from her work, her soft blue eyes filled with curiosity and concern. "You're always so careful, but it's dangerous out there. You never know who's watching. Where did you learn to move like that?" "Practice," Aralynn said with a small smile, evading the question. You pick things up when you explore a lot. Explore? Lyric said, leaning forward with a mischievous grin. Come on, Aralynn, admit it. You're not just sneaking around for fun. You've got some grand adventure you're not telling us about, don't you? Aralynn's smile tightened, but she kept her tone light. Maybe I just like the thrill. Thrill or not, Kyle interjected, his deep voice laced with concern. You're going to get yourself into trouble one of these days. Be careful. Aralynn laughed, settling into a chair. The warmth of their company eased the tension in her shoulders. Lyric's quick wit always made her smile, while Kyle's steady presence gave her a sense of safety she rarely felt. Ira's quiet strength, her hands always busy helping others, reminded Aralynn of the kind of person she aspired to be, someone who could bring comfort even in the darkest times. But as the chatter carried on and the laughter filled the air, Aralynn couldn't completely relax. They didn't know the full truth about her. How could they? For now, the secret stayed hers, even as a faint unease prickled at the back of her mind. Somewhere in the shadows, she could feel it, a subtle shift in the air, an unseen presence watching, waiting. Chapter 3. The Rusty Flagon Tavern. The Rusty Flagon Tavern was a world away from the gilded halls of Solera's palace. Its wooden beams were warped with age, the air thick with the mingling aromas of roasted meat, spilled ale, and pipe smoke. The flickering lanterns cast a hazy glow over the bustling crowd, where laughter and shouting melded into a chaotic symphony. It was the kind of place where reputations were made and broken, where secrets flowed as freely as the cider. Aralynn, her hood drawn low, sat at a corner table nursing a mug of cider. The bubbling liquid warmed her hands as she scanned the room. She had chosen this spot deliberately, not too close to the rowdy crowd of dice players, but near enough to the bar to overhear murmurs of gossip. It was her habit to listen for anything that might hint at the undercurrents of the kingdom, small threads of intrigue she could follow. Across from her, Lyric leaned back in his chair, flipping a coin between his fingers. "You've got that look again," he said, his sharp gray eyes narrowing. "The one where you're 2 seconds away from making trouble." Aralynn smirked, taking a sip from her mug. "Trouble finds me, Lyric. I don't have to go looking." Kyle, seated beside Lyric, grunted in agreement. "That's not entirely untrue," he said, his deep voice cutting through the din. "But it'd be nice if trouble took a night off for once." His dark brown eyes scanned the room, ever watchful. As a former soldier, Kyle carried an air of vigilance that rarely wavered, even in moments of calm. He had positioned himself with a clear line of sight to both the front door and the kitchen exit. Ira, ever the peacemaker, looked up from the herbal poultice she was carefully mixing. "Perhaps tonight will be quiet. The stars were clear," she said softly, her voice almost lost beneath the tavern's noise. "That's usually a good omen." Yet her gaze kept drifting toward the darker corners of the room, as if sensing something the others could not. "Stars don't have to walk through alleys in this city," Lyric quipped, his grin widening. "I'll stick to my knife and a quick exit, thanks." Aralynn chuckled, but felt a faint unease creeping into her chest. The carefree energy of the tavern couldn't quite shake the tension that had followed her all night. She had felt eyes on her as she navigated the streets, an unshakable sense that she was being watched. It wasn't uncommon for her to attract attention with her vibrant pink hair and confident stride, but this felt different, more deliberate, more menacing. Before she could dwell on it further, the tavern door slammed open with a crash. The chatter dipped momentarily as heads turned toward the entrance. A man staggered inside, his face pale and bloodied, his breath labored. He clutched his side, where his tunic was soaked with crimson. "Help!" he gasped, collapsing to his knees. "They're coming." Ira was on her feet in an instant, her pouch of herbs already in hand. She rushed to the man's side, her gentle hand steady as she began to assess his wounds. "Who did this to you?" she asked, her tone calm but urgent. The man's eyes darted wildly around the room before landing on Aralynn's table. "You!" he rasped, pointing a trembling finger. "The pink-haired girl. They're after you." Aralynn froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Lyric's coin slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the table as his expression turned serious. "Wait," he muttered, his gray eyes narrowing. "Who exactly is she?" Kyle's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword, his jaw tightening. "You've been keeping something from us," he said, his tone calm but edged with tension. "Why would anyone send an armed force after you?" "Who?" Kyle demanded, his voice low and steady. "Who's after her?" The man opened his mouth to reply, but a strangled cough racked his body, cutting him off. His head lolled to the side, his breathing shallow. Ira's hands moved quickly, applying pressure to the wound, but her expression was grim. "We need to get him out of here," she said, glancing up at the others. "If they're coming, we're all in danger." The words barely left her lips before the door slammed open again, this time with a deafening force. A group of armored figures spilled into the tavern, their faces obscured by dark helms. Their weapons gleamed in the lantern light as they scanned the room. "Caesar!" one of them barked, pointing directly at Aralynn. Aralynn hesitated, guilt and fear colliding in her chest. I'll explain later," she stammered, dodging the intensity of their gazes. But there was no time to answer their questions now. Chaos erupted. Patrons scrambled to escape, overturning tables and chairs in their haste. Aralynn ducked as a chair flew past her, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned sharply to face one of the armored figures closing in, her instincts kicking in as she drew her blade with practiced ease. The man lunged at her, his sword aiming for her midsection. Aralynn sidestepped gracefully, her years of secret training taking over. With a swift upward slash, she deflected his strike, the clash of steel ringing in her ears. Her opponent staggered, unprepared for the ferocity of her counterattack. Another attacker charged at her, but Aralynn was ready. She dropped into a low stance, sweeping her blade in a wide arc that forced him back. As he stumbled, she drove her hilt into his chest, knocking him off balance. The tavern's narrow confines forced her to adapt, each move calculated to turn the chaos to her advantage. A third figure attempted to flank her, but she spun on her heel, her pink braid whipping behind her as her sword found its mark. The flat of her blade struck the man's helm with a resounding crack, sending him reeling. Around her, the remaining patrons fled, leaving only overturned tables and shattered mugs in their wake. "Aralynn, now's not the time to show off," Lyric shouted from across the room, his dagger in hand as he parried a strike aimed his way. "I'm handling it," she shot back, her eyes blazing with determination. But as more armored figures poured through the doorway, she knew their odds were dwindling. Lyric, seeing the growing number of enemies, was on his feet in an instant, grabbing Aralynn's arm and yanking her toward the back door. "Time to go," he shouted, though his usual confidence was tinged with urgency. Kyle drew his sword, the gleaming blade catching the light of the flickering lanterns. His stance was solid and assured, every movement reflecting the discipline of a seasoned warrior. As the armored figures closed in, Kyle's expression was calm, his dark eyes focused with deadly precision. With a sharp intake of breath, he lunged forward, the blade of his sword slicing through the air with practiced grace. The first assailant swung clumsily, but Kyle moved like water, sidestepping the blow and bringing his sword down in a decisive arc that sent the attacker's weapon clattering to the floor. A second attacker charged with brute force, aiming to overpower him, but Kyle met the strike with an unyielding parry, the clang of steel reverberating through the tavern. With a twist of his wrist, he redirected the momentum, forcing his opponent off balance before delivering a clean strike that dropped him to his knees. Kyle's movements were sharp and deliberate, every swing of his blade a testament to his relentless training and precision. A third armored figure attempted to flank him, aiming for his exposed side. Kyle pivoted with surprising speed, his boots digging into the floorboards as he intercepted the blow with his blade. In one swift motion, he drove the hilt of his sword into the attacker's helm, the force of the impact reverberating through the air. The figure crumpled to the ground, unconscious, as Kyle turned to face the next threat with unwavering resolve. "Go!" Kyle barked, not sparing a glance at his friends as he deflected another strike. His tone left no room for argument, his focus unshakable as he held the line against the remaining attackers. Ira hesitated, her eyes darting between the wounded man and her fleeing companions. "I'll catch up," she said firmly, turning back to tend to the man despite the chaos around her. Aralynn barely had time to process what was happening as Lyric pulled her through the kitchen and out into the night. The cold air bit at her cheeks as they stumbled into the alley, the shouts of the armored men echoing behind them. Kyle joined them moments later, his sword streaked with blood. His piercing glare settled on Aralynn. "You owe us answers," he growled. "What aren't you telling us?" Aralynn's mind raced, 1,000 questions vying for attention. The weight of her secret now felt unbearable. She could see the confusion and anger in her friend's eyes. Who were these men? How had they tracked her? And why, after years of careful secrecy, was her true identity suddenly at risk? For the first time, she felt truly exposed. I'm the Princess of Solara," she finally admitted, the words tumbling from her lips like a confession. Lyric and Kale froze, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. For now, there was no time for answers. The only thing that mattered was staying alive. Chapter 4. Facing King Hadrian. The grand throne room of Solara was as imposing as ever, a space meant to command respect and awe. Gleaming marble floors reflected the golden chandeliers hanging high above, their light dancing across intricate murals depicting the kingdom's storied past. At the far end of the room stood the throne, an ornate masterpiece of carved gold and velvet, elevated on a dais that seemed to emphasize the gap between royalty and their subjects. Sitting upon it, King Hadrian cut a formidable figure, his fur-lined cloak draped over broad shoulders, his sharp blue eyes fixed intently on Aralynn as she was brought before him. His square jaw was set with a mixture of authority and tension, and faint lines etched around his eyes hinted at the burdens he carried as ruler of Solara. Though his stature was commanding, the shadows beneath his eyes betrayed restless nights and the weight of a kingdom perpetually at odds with itself. Aralynn stood before him, still in her plain cloak from the city, heart hammering. She remembered a time when this same room had felt warm, when her father would lift her onto his knee after court and tell her stories of brave queens who rode into battle. That father had slowly disappeared behind walls of duty and fear for the kingdom's stability. Now the distance between them felt wider than the marble floor stretching out before her. Her hood was gone, her vibrant pink hair an unmistakable mark of her identity. Despite the urgency of her flight from the rusty flagon, she had been summoned back to the palace under strict orders. Standing before her father now, her heart pounded, though she worked hard to keep her expression neutral. The court was nearly empty save for a handful of guards and the queen, who sat quietly to the side of the dais. Queen Lysandra's dark, wavy hair fell over her shoulders like a cascade of night, contrasting with the pale blue of her gown embroidered with silver filigree. Her soft green eyes carried both warmth and quiet strength, and her composed posture exuded the grace of someone who had weathered countless storms. Usually, her presence soothed Aralynn, a comforting constant in the ever-changing tides of palace life. But today, her mother's serene expression offered little comfort, her tightly clasped hands betraying a hint of unease. "Aralynn," King Hadrian began, his tone measured but heavy with disapproval. "Do you know what could have happened tonight?" Aralynn straightened her posture, clasping her hands behind her back. "Yes, father, I was nearly captured by armed mercenaries." "Because you were not where you were supposed to be," he replied, his voice rising slightly. "You left the palace without permission, again. How many times must we have this conversation?" The familiar frustration rising like bile. "I'm not a child anymore, father. You keep me locked away like some fragile vase while the kingdom suffers outside these walls. How can I rule people I've never truly seen?" She bristled at the reprimand, but held her ground. "I wasn't alone," she said, her tone firm. "Kyle, Lyric, and Era were with me. We handled it. No one followed us back." Hadrian's expression darkened further. "Handled it? Your friend Kyle left a trail of blood on the cobblestones leading to the alley." "That's not handling it, Aralynn. That's leaving a beacon for anyone willing to follow." Aralynn's fists clenched at her sides. "They were trying to take me, father. What was I supposed to do? Let them?" "You were supposed to stay within the palace walls where you were safe," he snapped, rising from his throne. His imposing frame loomed over her as he descended the dais. "You've put yourself, your friends, and this entire kingdom in jeopardy with your recklessness. If they had succeeded in taking you, do you have any idea what kind of leverage you would have given them?" Aralynn opened her mouth to respond, but Queen Lysandra's gentle voice cut through the tension. "Hadrian," she said softly, rising from her seat, Perhaps we should hear her side before passing judgment. The king paused, his fists clenched at his sides, before nodding curtly. Very well. Speak, Aralynn. Explain yourself. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I needed to get out, to see the city, to be among the people. I can't learn what it means to be their future queen if I'm locked away in the palace, hidden from the world. And those men, whoever they were, didn't just find me by accident. Someone told them where I was. Someone knows. Hadrian's expression hardened, though a flicker of unease crossed his features. Your duty is to this family and this kingdom, not to indulge your whims. It's not a whim, she shot back, unable to keep the frustration out of her voice. I learn more about Solara in one night among the people than I do in a month of court lectures. They're not just names and statistics, Father. They're real, and they need us to understand their struggles. The king stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. A flicker of something unspoken passed through his expression, a mix of weariness and concern, before he let out a heavy sigh and turned toward the tall windows that overlooked the city, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. You are my daughter, Aralynn, but you are also this kingdom's future. Do you understand the responsibility that carries? Every decision you make ripples outward. Every risk you take endangers more than just yourself. For a brief second, Aralynn saw the exhaustion in his shoulders, the same man who once stayed up all night when she had a fever as a child. But that tenderness was buried now beneath the crown. She wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't understand what it felt like to be stifled and confined. But something in his tone stopped her. For all his sternness, there was an undercurrent of fear in his words, fear for her, for what could have happened. Queen Lysandra stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Aralynn's shoulder. Her serene presence softened the tension in the room. Your father is right to be concerned, she said, her tone kind but measured. But I see your heart, my dear. It burns with the same passion that once drew me to him. That passion can guide you, but it must be tempered with wisdom. There is a way to balance both. Her soft green eyes met Aralynn's with unwavering sincerity, as if willing her to believe in herself. Before Aralynn could respond, the sound of the boots against marble echoed through the throne room. Uncle Varric appeared in the doorway, his presence commanding yet unassuming, as though he had anticipated the confrontation all along. His scarred face split into a knowing smile as he approached. Your Majesty, Varric said, inclining his head toward the king, forgive me for intruding, but I couldn't help overhearing. Hadrian turned, his sharp gaze narrowing. Varric, this is not your concern. On the contrary, Varric replied smoothly, his voice steady. Aralynn's actions, reckless as they may seem, demonstrate something rare, initiative. A future queen must learn to act decisively, even in the face of danger. Aralynn's eyes widened slightly as she glanced at her uncle, unsure whether to be grateful or wary of his unexpected defense. Varric caught her look and gave her a subtle nod. This isn't about initiative, Hadrian said, his tone firm. It's about responsibility and the consequences of carelessness. Perhaps, Varric conceded, his tone light. But sometimes, Your Majesty, it's the risks we take that teach us the most. With proper guidance, Aralynn's instincts could become her greatest strength. Hadrian frowned but didn't respond. Varric stepped closer to Aralynn, his movements deliberate but unthreatening. He leaned in slightly, his voice low and steady. You remind me of your mother when she was your age, he said, his tone filled with genuine warmth. She had that same fire. Don't let it burn out, Aralynn. It's what makes you who you are. The moment passed quickly, and Varric stepped back, his expression softening as he turned to Aralynn. His gaze lingered for a moment, and he offered a small, reassuring smile. You're stronger than you realize, Aralynn, he said, his voice filled with a quiet sincerity. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise. Hadrian exhaled deeply, returning to his throne. For now, you are to remain within the palace grounds. No more secret excursions. Is that understood? Aralynn hesitated but nodded. Yes, Father. Good. He returned to his throne, the weight of the moment settling over him. You may go. As she left the throne room, Her mother's hand lingered on her arm for a moment. "Be patient, Aralynn," the queen whispered. "Your time will come." Aralynn nodded but said nothing, her mind already racing. Her father's words had been clear, but so had her uncle's. If no one else would find the answers she sought, she would. Chapter 5. Dreaming of Adventure. The sun had long set over Solara, leaving the sprawling palace bathed in the pale silver light of the moon. From her balcony, Aralynn could see the vast expanse of the kingdom stretching to the horizon, a patchwork of rolling hills, glittering rivers, and flickering lanterns from distant villages. The mountains loomed in the distance, their jagged peaks shrouded in mist, mysterious and inviting. Rumors had been spreading through the palace corridors lately, whispers of failing crops in the outer provinces, merchants complaining about increased bandit activity, and strange tales of the ancient protective wards flickering at night. The Festival of Unity was meant to quiet those fears, but Aralynn could feel the tension growing beneath the surface. She leaned against the railing, her chin resting on her hand, and sighed. The events of the day replayed in her mind, the narrow escape from the mercenaries, her father's stern lecture, her mother's quiet reassurances. Yet, for all the tension and fear, one thought persisted above the rest. The world beyond the palace walls was calling to her, louder than ever. Her gaze drifted to the modified carriage parked in the courtyard below. Its unassuming exterior hid compartments filled with provisions, maps, and gear for a journey. It had been Varick's idea, a secret project they'd worked on together over the past year. Though her uncle had cautioned patience, she couldn't help but feel her moment to leave was drawing near. "To adventure," she whispered to herself, the words both a promise and a prayer. Lately her dreams had been filled with the same recurring image, a glowing sword with a sun and moon hilt, calling to her from the shadows. She had sketched it obsessively in her journal, but the dreams had grown more vivid since the attack at the tavern, as if the blade itself was reaching out to her. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts, though the sound was almost unnecessary. Ira had already slipped into the room, moving with the practiced silence of someone used to going unnoticed. The healer's soft blue eyes shone with concern as she approached, but there was something else in her gaze, an awareness that hadn't been there before. "You should be resting," Ira said gently, her voice calm but carrying a hint of hesitation. "It's been a long day." Her gaze lingered on Aralynn for a moment, as though she were piecing together a puzzle that had suddenly become clear. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell us who you are?" she asked, her tone free of accusation but heavy with curiosity. I had no idea until that night." Aralynn offered her a faint smile, though her expression turned apologetic. "I'm sorry, Ara, for not telling you, any of you, about who I really am. I thought keeping it a secret would make things easier, but now I realize I was wrong. There's just too much to think about." Ara joined her by the balcony, her presence calming but her expression thoughtful. "You're worried about the mercenaries," she said, though there was an edge to her tone, as if her words carried more meaning than they seemed. "And about why you kept your identity hidden from us," she added, her voice softening. "But it's okay, Aralynn. I understand why you didn't want anyone to know you're the princess." "Not just that," Aralynn admitted. "It's everything. The palace, the expectations, the danger. It feels like I'm always waiting for something to happen. But I don't know what." Ara considered her words for a moment, her gaze fixed on the kingdom stretching beyond the balcony. "Change is coming," she said softly, her voice almost distant. Then her eyes flicked back to Aralynn, steady and sure. "But whatever happens, you won't face it alone. You have more allies than you realize, even if some of us are still catching up." Her words warmed Aralynn's heart, but they also deepened her resolve. "Thank you, Ara," she said, placing a hand on her friend's arm. "That means more than you know." The two stood in silence for a moment, watching the moonlight play over the landscape. Finally, Ara broke the quiet. "You should try to get some sleep," she said. "We'll face tomorrow together." Aralynn nodded, though she doubted sleep would come easily. As Ira left the room, she turned back to the balcony, her thoughts drifting once more to the mountains in the distance. She had always dreamed of exploring them, of discovering the secrets hidden within their mists. But now it felt less like a dream and more like a destiny waiting to unfold. Her gaze fell to the leather-bound journal resting on her bedside table. She crossed the room and picked it up, running her fingers over the worn cover. It was filled with sketches, notes, and plans she'd made for her eventual journey. Maps of the kingdom, descriptions of landmarks, and even fragments of old legends Varric had shared with her over the years. One page in particular caught her eye, a sketch of a sword she'd seen in one of Varric's stories, its hilt adorned with intricate gemstones in the shape of the sun and moon. The blade of the protector. That's what Varric called it, she murmured, tracing the drawing with her finger. According to Varric, it had once belonged to the first ruler of Solara, a weapon said to be imbued with magic strong enough to unite or destroy kingdoms. It was a tale she'd heard countless times as a child, but now it felt oddly significant. Closing the journal, Aralynn set it aside and climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. Her mind buzzed with plans and possibilities, but eventually the rhythm of her breathing slowed and sleep claimed her. Outside, the moon continued its silent vigil, casting its light over the kingdom of Solara and the princess who dreamed of a life beyond its borders. Chapter 6. The Festival of Unity. The city of Solara shone like a beacon of joy as the Festival of Unity reached its height. Vibrant banners in shades of crimson, gold, and sapphire draped the streets, their silken threads catching the lantern light. Music from traveling minstrels filled the air, weaving through the excited chatter of nobles and commoners alike. The aroma of roasted chestnuts, spiced meats, and sweet pastries mingled with the evening breeze, creating a tantalizing blend that made the celebration unforgettable. Yet, beneath the revelry, Aralynn noticed the undercurrents, merchants grumbling about rising taxes, farmers speaking in hushed tones about blighted fields, and a few bolder voices questioning whether the royal family still protected the kingdom's ancient wards. Even amid the joy, her recurring dreams of the glowing blade lingered at the edge of her mind. From her vantage point atop the royal balcony, Aralynn watched the festivities unfold. Her emerald green gown shimmered with silver embroidery, catching the flicker of nearby torches. Her pink hair was braided intricately, small jewels woven into the strands. Beside her stood King Hadrian and Queen Lysandra, their presence regal and commanding as they greeted the throngs below. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Lysandra said softly, her serene smile unwavering. "This festival reminds us of the strength we find in unity. Every lantern, every laugh is a testament to what this kingdom has achieved together." Aralynn nodded, but her gaze wandered to the outskirts of the square where the lights dimmed and shadows crept. "It is beautiful," she admitted, her voice thoughtful. "But I can't stop thinking about the places beyond the square, beyond the walls. What is unity worth if it doesn't reach them?" Her mother's smile faltered, a flicker of concern crossing her features. Before she could reply, King Hadrian stepped forward, his booming voice cutting through the celebratory noise. "My people," he declared, his tone commanding but warm. "Tonight, we honor the bonds that hold this kingdom together. Let this festival remind us of our shared strength and the prosperity we have built side by side. Raise your voices with me as we celebrate the unity of Solara." The crowd erupted into cheers, their joy echoing through the city. Aralynn clapped along with her parents, though her thoughts remained distant. The grandeur of the celebration felt hollow against the nagging sense of imbalance she couldn't shake. Hours later, as the festival continued in the streets below, Aralynn slipped away from the royal banquet. The echoes of music and laughter grew faint as she wandered toward a secluded courtyard. The stars above shone brightly, their light casting a gentle glow over the gardens. She found Kyle waiting there, his broad shoulders tense as he leaned against a stone bench. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Aralynn teased as she approached, her footsteps light against the cobblestones. Kyle turned, his expression softening when he saw her. "Just trying to find some quiet," he said. "It's a lot, isn't it?" She nodded, taking a seat beside him. "It always is, but tonight feels different." Kyle's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Aralynn hesitated, glancing up at the stars. I don't know. It's just a feeling. Like something is out of balance. Do you ever get that? Kyle's gaze remained steady on her, his voice quiet. I think we all do, in our own way. But if you're feeling it, Aralynn, maybe you should trust it. Their conversation was interrupted by Lyric's arrival, his usual grin flashing as he sauntered into the courtyard. What are you two lovebirds brooding about? He teased, earning an exasperated sigh from Kyle. We were enjoying a quiet moment, Kyle replied pointedly. Quiet moments are overrated, Lyric said, flipping a small pouch in his hand. The sound of jingling coins filled the air. And besides, I thought you'd want to see my latest score. Aralynn raised an eyebrow. Please tell me you didn't steal from the festival. Steal is such a strong word, Lyric said, feigning innocence. Let's just say I relieved someone of their excess weight. Generous of me, really. Kyle shook his head, muttering under his breath, but Aralynn couldn't help but laugh. The tension in her chest eased for a moment, replaced by the comfort of her friend's familiar banter. Meanwhile, in the heart of the palace, Era stood in the library, her hands hovering over an ancient tome. The pages glowed faintly under her touch, the delicate script pulsing with a rhythm that felt alive. She furrowed her brow, her usually calm expression troubled. The kingdom's magic was changing. She could feel it in the air, an imbalance that made her stomach twist. This book, a record of Solara's magical history, hinted at something ominous. But the answers were elusive, buried in cryptic passages and forgotten lore. A faint rustling behind her made her turn sharply. Varric stood in the doorway, his shadow stretching long across the library floor. Burning the midnight oil, are we? He said, his tone light but his gaze sharp. Era nodded, closing the tome. Something feels wrong. Have you noticed it? Varric's expression was unreadable as he stepped closer. Wrong how? The balance of magic, she replied. It's shifting, and I think it's tied to the kingdom's stability. If it's not addressed, it could lead to... She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Varric placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. You worry too much, child. The kingdom has faced worse. Go get some rest. The Festival of Unity is a time for celebration, not fretting over old books. Era nodded reluctantly, but as she watched Varric leave, a sliver of unease lodged itself deeper in her mind. Something in his tone didn't sit right, as if he knew more than he let on. Outside, the festival continued in all its splendor. But beneath the lights and laughter, a storm was brewing, and the first cracks in Solara's unity had already begun to show. Chapter 7. Betrayal in the Night. The palace of Solara, bathed in moonlight, seemed tranquil on the surface, but shadows lurked within its gilded halls. Aralynn sat on her bed, staring out at the city's spires. The faint sounds of the festival had faded, leaving an eerie stillness that unsettled her. She was about to extinguish the lantern when a soft knock came at the door. The day's events weighed heavily on her. The argument with her father, the growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong with the kingdom, and the nagging feeling of being watched had left her restless. Sleep felt impossible. Aralynn? May I come in? Her father's voice was unexpected, and her heart leapt with surprise. Of course, father, she replied, quickly rising to her feet. King Hadrian stepped into the room, his imposing figure softened in the dim light. His sharp blue eyes, often steely, held a gentleness that caught her off guard. I wanted to apologize, he began, his tone measured but sincere. For how I spoke to you earlier, I was too harsh. Aralynn blinked, stunned. You don't need to apologize. You were right. I acted recklessly. Hadrian crossed the room, placing a hand on her shoulder. You have your mother's fire, Aralynn, and sometimes I don't know how to handle it. I worry about you. For a fleeting moment, Aralynn saw the father she remembered from childhood, the one who had carried her on his shoulders through the gardens. But the weight of the crown had changed him, and she wondered if he could ever see her as more than a fragile heir. Before she could respond, a faint chill swept through the room. The shadows in the corner seemed to shift unnaturally, catching Aralynn's eye. She turned just as a dark figure emerged, moving faster than her eyes could follow. It left behind only a trail of fading shadow as it darted toward them. "Father, look out!" she cried, reaching for her dagger on the bedside table. But the figure was too quick. In one fluid motion, it snatched the dagger from her hand and plunged it into King Hadrian's chest. Time seemed to freeze as the king's eyes widened in shock, his hand clutching the blade hilt buried in his heart. The dark figure hesitated only for a moment before leaping through the open window, vanishing into the night. "No!" Aralynn screamed, catching her father as he collapsed to the floor. Blood seeped through his robes, staining her hands as she tried desperately to stop the flow. "Stay with me, father, please." Hadrian's lips moved, but no sound came. His gaze softened, a tear slipping down his cheek before his body went limp. Aralynn's sobs filled the room as she clung to him, her hands trembling and covered in blood. The door burst open, and a group of guards rushed in. They froze at the sight before them, the king's lifeless body cradled in Aralynn's arms, her hands red with his blood. "Princess Aralynn," one guard said, his voice filled with horror and disbelief, "what have you done?" "It wasn't me," she cried, her voice breaking. "Someone else, a shadow. It wasn't me." The guards exchanged uncertain glances, but their duty was clear. "By order of the royal decree, you are under arrest for the murder of King Hadrian," another guard announced, stepping forward with shackles in hand. Before they could restrain her, Lyric appeared in the doorway, his dagger drawn. "You're not taking her," he growled, his voice low and deadly. The guards hesitated, but Lyric wasted no time. He lunged at the nearest one, his movements swift and precise. Chaos erupted as Aralynn scrambled to her feet, her mind a whirlwind of grief and disbelief. She grabbed the heavy candlestick from her bedside table, using it to fend off another guard. "Aralynn, we have to go," Lyric shouted, parrying a strike from a third guard. "Now." She hesitated, glancing back at her father's lifeless form. Her heart felt as though it might shatter, but Lyric's voice snapped her back to reality. "If we stay, we're both dead." Aralynn nodded, her tears mixing with the blood on her hands as she followed Lyric to the concealed passage hidden behind a tapestry. The narrow corridors beneath the palace were cold and damp, the air thick with the scent of earth and mildew. Lyric led the way, his lantern casting flickering shadows on the rough stone walls. Aralynn struggled to keep up, her mind racing with questions and fears. "Lyric," she said, her voice trembling, "where's my mother? We have to find her." Lyric slowed, glancing back at her with a look of uncertainty. "She's probably okay, Aralynn. She's still the queen. We'll try to get to her later so you can explain to her what happened." "I'm not leaving without her," Aralynn said, her tone resolute despite her shaking hands. "She could be in danger." Lyric sighed, but nodded. "Fine. We'll check her chambers, but we have to move fast." They retraced their steps through a side tunnel that led back into the palace's residential wing. The route was fraught with danger, the distant sounds of boots echoing closer. When they reached Queen Lysandra's chambers, the door was slightly ajar. Aralynn's heart sank. "Mother?" she called softly, pushing the door open. The room was empty, the queen's usual grace and order replaced with overturned furniture and broken glass. A trail of scuff marks led to the balcony, but there was no sign of her. Aralynn's chest tightened as she ran to the window, scanning the dark gardens below. "She's gone," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They took her." Lyric placed a hand on her shoulder. "We can't stay here. The guards are closing in." As if on cue, the sound of heavy boots grew louder in the corridor. Aralynn turned to see torchlight flickering through the crack under the door. "They're here," she said, panic rising in her chest. Lyric nodded, his grip tightening on his dagger. "We'll figure out how to save her, but not if we're captured. Come on." He led her toward the hidden passage behind a bookshelf, but as they slipped inside, the sound of the door crashing open behind them sent a shiver down Aralynn's spine. She turned for one last glance at the destroyed chamber, the echoes of her mother's absence weighing heavily on her heart. As the guards' voices grew louder, she followed Lyric deeper into the hidden corridors, her grief now entwined with a burning resolve. The storm of betrayal that had erupted in Solara was no longer confined to whispers and shadows. It had swallowed her family whole. For Aralynn, survival was only the first step in fighting back. Chapter 8. The Escape. The cold night air bit at Aralynn's cheeks as she emerged from the hidden passage beneath the palace. The stars above offered little comfort, their dim light barely cutting through the oppressive darkness that surrounded her. Behind her, the faint sounds of pursuit still echoed through the winding corridors, a grim reminder of the danger she faced. Lyric pressed a hand to her back, urging her forward. "Keep moving," he whispered. "We're not out of this yet." Before they could take another step, a shadow emerged from the trees ahead. Aralynn's heart leapt into her throat as she reached for the small dagger at her belt, but the figure stepped into the moonlight, revealing Uncle Varric's familiar face. His expression was grim, his sword drawn. "Uncle!" Aralynn gasped, a surge of relief washing over her. "Thank the gods! They've killed father and taken mother. They're after me." Varric's eyes flicked across her blood-stained hands and torn clothes. For a split second, something unreadable crossed his face, almost like satisfaction, before his features settled into concern. Varric nodded, his jaw tight. His eyes flicked briefly to the shadows behind her, as though calculating something unseen. "I know. I've managed to mislead some of the guards, but they'll catch up soon enough. We don't have much time." Lyric eyed Varric warily, but said nothing, his hand still resting on the hilt of his dagger. Aralynn, too overwhelmed by the night's events, didn't notice the flicker of calculation in her uncle's eyes. "You need to leave Solara," Varric continued, his tone urgent but his movements oddly stiff. He pulled a rolled map from his satchel, hesitating for a fraction of a second before thrusting it into Aralynn's hands. His grip lingered on the parchment, his knuckles whitening as though reluctant to let it go. "This will guide you to a safe path through the mountains. There's a small village just beyond the pass where you can find refuge." Aralynn stared at the map, her hands trembling. "But what about Mother? I can't just leave her." Varric placed a firm hand on her shoulder, his eyes locking onto hers. "You have to leave now, Aralynn, for your safety. I promise I'll find your mother and straighten everything out. Once it's safe, you can come back and explain everything to her." His voice was steady, but there was an urgency that left no room for argument. Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded. "I understand." Varric pulled a small pouch from his belt, handing it to Lyric. "There's enough coin here to get you through the first few weeks. Use it wisely." His voice dropped, his gaze flicking briefly to Aralynn before settling on Lyric. "And, Lyric," he added with a faint edge in his tone, "you're responsible for her now. Don't fail her." The words seemed heavier than they should, leaving Lyric to narrow his eyes slightly in response. Lyric's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I won't." Varric glanced over his shoulder, his expression darkening. "They're coming. Aralynn, you need to go now." "But Uncle, I didn't do it," she pleaded, her voice breaking. Varric's face softened for a moment, but his tone remained urgent. "I believe you, Aralynn, but the king's guards serve the king, not us. They won't listen to reason. That's why I need to get to the bottom of this. Go now, and I'll make sure your mother is safe. I'll send for you as soon as it's safe." Aralynn hesitated, torn between gratitude and the nagging unease that something about this felt off. Varric's voice had been steady, but his posture felt too rigid, his eyes darting to the forest's edge as though distracted. Her chest ached as she thought of her mother, alone in the palace. Every instinct screamed at her to stay, to fight, to find her mother and protect her. But the image of her father's lifeless body flashed in her mind, and a wave of guilt washed over her. Could she really abandon her mother to the same fate? "I'm sorry, Mother," she whispered under her breath, her voice cracking. "I'll come back for you. I promise." Lyric tugged at her arm, his voice pulling her from her thoughts. "Come on, Aralynn, we've got to move." With one last glance at her uncle, Aralynn turned and ran, the map clutched tightly in her hand. The trees swallowed them, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers to block out the moonlight. They moved quickly, Lyric leading the way with the ease of someone who had spent years navigating the shadows. After what felt like hours, they stopped to catch their breath by a small stream. Aralynn unrolled the map, studying the route Varric had marked. Her fingers traced the path through the mountains, but a knot of doubt tightened in her chest. "This route takes us dangerously close to the obsidian wastes," she murmured, her brow furrowing. Lyric leaned over her shoulder, his sharp eyes scanning the map. "You're right. If we're not careful, we'll end up in the middle of the enemy territory." Aralyn's stomach churned. Why would Uncle Varric send us this way? He said it was safe. Lyric's expression darkened. Maybe he doesn't know the area as well as he thinks. Or maybe... He trailed off, his hesitation speaking volumes. Aralyn's heart sank. She wanted to trust her uncle, the man who had treated her more like a daughter than her own father ever had, the one who had taught her to fight and always stood by her side. But the events of the night had shaken her faith in everything she thought she knew. "We'll stick to the edges," Lyric said finally. "Avoid the main trails. It'll take longer, but it's safer." Aralynn nodded, folding the map carefully and tucking it into her satchel. "Let's keep moving. The sooner we're out of Solara, the better." As they continued deeper into the forest, Aralynn couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The night seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing darker and the air colder. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see Varric's figure emerging from the trees. But there was nothing, only the silent, impenetrable darkness. And yet, she couldn't shake the suspicion that her uncle's guidance had steered her onto a path far more dangerous than she realized. Chapter 9. Friends in Exile. The wilderness stretched endlessly before them, a sea of dense forests and rugged mountains bathed in the pale light of dawn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, but to Aralynn, it felt oppressive. Each step away from Solara's golden spires weighed heavier on her heart. The farther she traveled, the less certain she became of her path and her allies. Lyric led the way through the dense undergrowth, his movements quick and silent. Aralynn followed close behind, her eyes scanning their surroundings for any sign of pursuit. She had no doubt her father's soldiers were closing in. Uncle Varric had warned her of the dangers she'd face, but his words now felt tainted, the memory of his actions leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. "We're coming up on the ridge," Lyric said, glancing over his shoulder. "Once we're there, we'll have a better view of the valley. Should be safer to rest." Aralynn nodded, though she barely heard him. Her mind was focused on her mom and what happened to her father. She wondered when she could finally meet up with them and explain everything, that she hadn't killed her father and that she was being framed. The thought of seeing them again brought a flicker of warmth to her chest, but it was quickly doused by a wave of doubt. Would they still trust her? Would they believe the lies that had been spread about her? Worse, would they think she had actually done it? The thought twisted in her gut, making her steps feel heavier with every stride. By the time they reached the ridge, the sun had risen fully, casting long shadows across the valley below. Aralynn's heart leapt as she spotted the faint curl of smoke rising from the trees. A small village. Lyric grinned, his gray eyes glinting. "Told you we'd make it. Come on." As they descended into the forest, the sound of rustling leaves and snapping twigs grew louder. Aralynn's hand hovered near her dagger, her instincts honed by years of secret training. She relaxed only when she caught sight of Cale's broad frame emerging from the shadows, his sword drawn. "Lyric," Kyle said, his voice gruff but tinged with relief. His gaze shifted to Aralynn, and he stiffened. "Aralynn, you're alive." She stepped forward, her throat tightening. "Cale, it's a long story, but I didn't do what they're saying. You have to believe me." Kyle's dark eyes searched hers for a moment before he nodded. "I believe you, but the kingdom doesn't. Worse, everyone thinks you killed the king. We need to figure out our next move." Before Aralynn could respond, Ira appeared, her healer's satchel slung over one shoulder. Her soft blue eyes were filled with worry as she approached, wrapping Aralynn in a gentle embrace. "You've been through so much," Ira murmured. "We'll get through this together." For a moment, the weight on Aralynn's chest lifted, but as they settled into the village, the tension between them began to surface. Lyric paced restlessly, his sharp tongue lashing out whenever Kyle questioned their next steps. Kyle, ever the pragmatist, grew increasingly frustrated with Lyric's carefree attitude, and Ira, though calm and supportive, seemed distracted, her gaze frequently drifting toward the ancient forest around them. Aralynn sat apart from the others, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her cloak. She felt the doubt creeping in, a gnawing uncertainty that she couldn't shake. Varick's map had led them dangerously close to the Duskwood Barrens, a region known for its eerie silence and twisted trees. Though they had avoided the worst of the dangers, the path ahead remained treacherous. Her uncle's actions, his insistence that she flee, felt less like protection and more like manipulation. "Something's not right," she muttered to herself. Era, overhearing her, sat down beside her. "What do you mean?" Aralynn hesitated, unsure how much to say. "It's Varick. He gave me this map, but the route, it's almost like he wanted us to get caught." Era frowned, her gentle features hardening. "Do you think he betrayed you?" Aralynn shook her head, though the thought had crossed her mind. "I don't know. He's always been loyal. But something about the way he looked at me that night, it didn't feel right." Era placed a comforting hand on Aralynn's shoulder. "Trust your instincts. They've kept you alive this far." Before they could continue, a distant howl echoed through the forest, chilling the air around them. Kyle was on his feet in an instant, his hand on the hilt of his sword. Lyric's pacing stopped, his gray eyes narrowing. "That's no wolf," Lyric said, his voice low. "Bounty hunters, they've caught our trail." Aralynn's brow furrowed, her voice rising with disbelief. "Why would they send bounty hunters and not soldiers?" Lyric exchanged a glance with Kyle, who stepped forward, his tone grim. "I don't think they're here to take you back," Kyle said, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. "They're here to make sure you don't get the chance to clear your name." Aralynn's heart raced as the group quickly packed their supplies. The peaceful respite of the camp was over. Together, they moved deeper into the wilderness, their steps quick and quiet. The tension between them remained, but for now, survival bound them together. As they disappeared into the forest, Aralynn glanced over her shoulder, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. She didn't know who to trust, but one thing was certain: the fight for her life and her kingdom was only just beginning. Chapter 10. The Hunter's Prey. The air grew colder as dusk settled over the forest. The faint rustle of leaves whispered warnings of unseen dangers. A chilling wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of blood and decay. The ground beneath them was uneven and damp, with fallen leaves muffling their cautious footsteps. The faint metallic tang of steel she could now sense all too well, mingled with the earthy aroma of the forest, sharpening her focus. Aralynn's grief had hardened into something sharper, resolve mixed with a gnawing paranoia. Every shadow reminded her of the figure that killed her father, and every rustle made her wonder if Varick's map was truly a lifeline or a trap. "Stay close," Aralynn whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Her companions nodded, their movements purposeful but quiet as they followed her lead. She stole a glance at Kyle, his usual stoicism intact, but his grip on his sword tighter than usual. Lyric was beside Ira, his hand brushing against his dagger, his expression unreadable. Her thoughts darted back to Varick. His warnings about betrayal echoed in her mind, but now they felt less like advice and more like carefully planted seeds. Did he know they'd be waiting here? She wondered, a knot tightening in her stomach. She pushed the thought aside for now, though doubt lingered at the edge of her resolve. She couldn't afford to dwell on it. The first sign of danger came as a faint shift in the wind. The forest fell silent, as if holding its breath. Aralynn raised a hand to halt the group, her heart pounding in her chest. A shadow moved between the trees, too quick to follow. "They're here," she murmured. Before anyone could react, an arrow whizzed through the air, embedding itself in the tree beside Lyric's head. He cursed, ducking just as the cloaked archer emerged from the shadows, notching another arrow with terrifying precision. "Ambush!" Kale bellowed, stepping in front of Aralynn and deflecting another arrow with his sword. The clash of steel against wood echoed in the silence, breaking the tension like a dam. The leader of the bounty hunters stepped into view, his scarred face illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. His axe gleamed menacingly as he grinned. "You should have kept running, Princess," he drawled. "Would have been easier that way." Aralynn's chest tightened, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice firm but calm. "Whatever you're being paid, I'll double it." The scarred man chuckled, his laughter cold and sharp. "This isn't about gold, girl. This is about making sure you never get the chance to clear your name." The words hit her like a physical blow. She clenched her jaw, the weight of her father's murder, and the betrayal swirling within her like a storm. She glanced at Kyle, who silently pulled a second sword from his back and handed it to her. The familiar weight in her hand steadied her resolve. "Then you'll have to kill me," she said, raising the blade. Her voice didn't waver. Kyle stepped closer, his second sword already in Aralynn's hand. His unspoken trust in her decisions steadied her, but her thoughts raced. "Stay tight," she barked, raising her voice slightly above the tension. "If they flank us, fall back to the rocks. We use the terrain to force them into narrow angles." The clarity of her orders surprised even herself, but the nods from Kale and Lyric bolstered her confidence. Their trust and her role as leader fueled her resolve. The battle erupted with ferocious intensity. The brute barreled toward Kyle, swinging his spiked mace with brutal force. Kyle met him head-on, their weapons colliding in a thunderous clash. Sparks flew as their weapons screeched, and Kyle's blade sliced through the brute's exposed arm. With a roar of pain, the man swung wildly, leaving himself open for Kale to plunge his sword into his chest. The brute's eyes widened, blood bubbling from his lips as he crumpled to the ground. Aralynn darted through the chaos, her eyes fixed on the archer. The woman loosed an arrow that grazed Aralynn's shoulder, but she didn't falter. Her sword flashed in the moonlight, slicing through the bowstring and sending the weapon clattering to the ground. The archer drew twin daggers, lunging at Aralynn with a hiss. Aralynn dodged, spinning around to drive her blade into the archer's stomach. Blood spurted from the wound as the woman gasped, collapsing to her knees. Aralynn pulled the blade free, and the archer toppled forward, lifeless. Lyric engaged the dagger-wielding woman with swift precision, his movements fluid and deadly. She feinted left, her twin blades slashing toward his ribs, but Lyric anticipated the maneuver and twisted aside, his dagger striking out and slicing deep into her thigh. The woman screamed, staggering as blood poured from the wound, but she still lunged with wild desperation. Lyric parried her attack effortlessly, his movements sharp and calculated. With a fluid motion, he drove his blade into her chest, the steel piercing her heart. She froze, her eyes widening in shock before she crumpled to the ground, lifeless. As Lyric turned, his sharp gaze caught movement in the shadows. Another bounty hunter, a towering figure wielding a wickedly curved blade, charged toward him with a guttural roar. Lyric braced himself, sidestepping the initial swing and slashing at the man's side. The blade struck home, drawing a deep gash, but the hunter barely flinched, his massive form barreling forward. Lyric twisted, his dagger flashing in the dim light as he parried blow after blow, the force of each clash sending vibrations up his arm. Ira, seeing Lyric struggle, raised her staff. The light that erupted was blinding, illuminating the dense forest in sharp relief and searing into the bounty hunter's eyes. He roared, swinging wildly in his disorientation. Lyric stepped in fluidly, his blade slicing into the man's exposed side, then up into his throat. The hunter staggered back, his blood splattering against the dark bark of the trees before he fell with a heavy thud, his gurgling cries fading to silence. "Nice timing," Lyric muttered to Era, his chest heaving as he wiped blood from his blade. Era gave a curt nod, her hands glowing faintly as she prepared to aid anyone else injured. The leader roared with fury as he charged at Aralynn, his massive axe cleaving through the air. She ducked and rolled, her sword flashing upward to slice through his exposed side. He bellowed, staggering as blood poured from the wound. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled, swinging wildly. Aralynn sidestepped, her blade striking true again, this time across his throat. His eyes widened in shock before he collapsed to the ground in a lifeless heap. The forest fell eerily silent as the last of the bounty hunters lay dead, their lifeless forms strewn among the trees. Aralynn's chest heaved as she surveyed the carnage, her bloodied blade dangling in her grip. She felt the weight of every decision she'd made, the lives taken to protect her own. Her gaze shifted to Lyric, who staggered unexpectedly, clutching his side. "Lyric," she called out, her voice cutting through the quiet. Ira was already at his side, her hands glowing with the faint aura of her magic. The warmth of her power contrasted with the cold dread that clung to Aralynn. Kyle approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did well," he said. His armor was battered, his face streaked with dirt, but his resolve remained unshaken. "We need to move. Reinforcements could be close, and we don't have the numbers to face another wave." Aralynn nodded, her thoughts shifting back to Varric's map. Why did he lead us here? She wondered again, the unease in her chest growing heavier. She would push forward, for her survival, her mother, and the truth. She wouldn't let the kingdom's betrayal define her. She would fight, and win. Chapter 11. Shadows of Conspiracy. The forest grew quieter as the group pressed on, the earlier chaos of the battle fading into the tense rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. Aralynn led the way, her sword still unsheathed, the blood now dried on its edge, a grim reminder of the night's events. Kyle followed close behind, his eyes scanning their surroundings with a soldier's precision, while Ira walked beside Lyric, her hand occasionally brushing his arm to steady him. "We need to find a safe place to rest," Kyle said, his voice low but firm. "Lyric's wound might reopen if we push too hard." Aralynn nodded, her gaze fixed ahead. "We'll stop soon, but we can't stay too close to the battleground. If they send scouts, they'll find us." The group pushed through a dense thicket, the branches clawing at their clothes, until they stumbled into a clearing. In the center stood the crumbling remnants of an ancient stone structure. Vines snaked up the weathered walls and moss covered much of the ground. The air here felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. "What is this place?" Lyric asked, wincing slightly as he leaned against a broken pillar. Ira stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the ruins. Her fingers brushed the surface of a carved stone, and a faint glow pulsed beneath her touch. "It's old magic," she murmured. "Very old. These symbols, they're tied to the kingdom's ancient protective wards, but something about them feels wrong." Aralynn stepped closer, her gaze tracing the faintly glowing runes. "Wrong how?" Ira hesitated, then turned to face her. "Corrupted. Twisted. It's like someone's been manipulating the wards. If I'm right, this magic isn't protecting the kingdom anymore. It's feeding off it." Kyle's brow furrowed. "Feeding off it? What does that mean?" "The magic here was designed to protect Solara from external threats," Ira explained. "But if someone's tampered with it, they could be using it to siphon power. It's no longer serving the kingdom, it's working against it." Aralynn's stomach churned as she took in the weight of Ira's words. The pieces were slowly connecting. The failing wards, the mercenaries, Varric's suspicious map. Someone close to the throne was deliberately weakening Solara. Aralynn stepped further into the ruins, her boots crunching on the loose stones. Something about this place felt familiar, as though it tugged at a memory buried deep within her. "If someone's corrupting the wards, they'd need a lot of power," she said, her voice steady despite the unease in her chest. "And a lot of help." Lyric, who had been silent for a while, pushed off the pillar and joined her. "Help like a secret council?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Kyle's hand instinctively went to his sword. "A council? Do you have proof?" Lyric gestured to the far side of the clearing, where the remnants of a campsite lay hidden beneath the overgrowth. Together, the group moved to investigate. Among the ashes of a long-dead fire, they found scraps of parchment bearing intricate symbols and a sunburst crest, a symbol once associated with Solara's noble houses. Scrawled beneath the symbols was a cryptic line that sent a chill through Aralynn. "The one who wields the legendary blade shall rule over Solara." Another fragment caught her eye, its faded text describing a hidden cave near the castle grounds. Within lies the relic of the true ruler, protected by a magical seal that only royal blood may bypass. Aralynn's chest tightened as she read the words, the weight of their implications settling heavily on her. Aralynn picked up one of the scraps, her heart sinking as she read the faint scrawl. "By decree of the Obsidian Council, the wards will fall, and the dawn of the new Solara will rise," she read aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "This isn't just a conspiracy. They're planning to overthrow the royal family." Kyle's jaw tightened. "If the wards fall, the kingdom will be defenseless against outside forces." Ira's fingers tightened around her staff. "And whoever is behind this doesn't care about the destruction they'll cause." Aralynn straightened, her resolve hardening. Then we stop them. We find out who's behind this council, and we stop them before they tear the kingdom apart." The others nodded, their expressions grim but determined. As they began to gather what they could from the ruins, the faint glow of the corrupted wards seemed to pulse ominously, as though mocking their efforts. The fight for Solara's survival had only just begun. Chapter 12. The Spider's Web. The air within the hidden passage was thick and musty, the flickering torchlight casting shadows that danced along the stone walls. Word had reached Aralynn that her mother was alive and well within the castle. The relief had been fleeting, replaced quickly by determination as they planned their return. Aralynn led her companions, her hand gripping the hilt of her sword tightly as they crept toward the heart of the castle. The hidden tunnels Varric had once shown her as a child now served as their path, every twist and turn marked in her memory. The air within the passage was thick and musty, the flickering torchlight casting shadows that danced along the stone walls. Every step was measured and silent. Aralynn's mind churned with questions. If her mother was truly safe, why the altered crest? Why the silence from Varric? The blade she now carried felt heavier with every step, as if it sensed the growing web of lies around them. "We're close," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This tunnel leads directly into the lower levels of the palace. From there, we can get to my mother's chambers." Kyle frowned, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "And what if she's not alone?" "She'll listen to me," Aralynn replied, though her voice wavered slightly. She glanced at Lyric and Era, both of whom gave her encouraging nods. The unspoken bond between them was the only thing keeping her from crumbling under the weight of doubt and fear. When they emerged into the dimly lit servants' corridor, the group moved swiftly and silently. Aralynn's heart raced as they neared her mother's chambers, but when she reached the door, she froze. The royal sigil had been altered. The golden sunburst of her family's crest was now entwined with a black angular symbol she didn't recognize. The angular lines seemed jagged and aggressive, like claws gripping the sunburst, twisting its meaning. The symbol exuded a sense of dominance and corruption, as if it belonged to a faction intent on subjugation rather than unity. Aralynn's stomach churned. "What does this mean?" she murmured, running her fingers over the carving. Her mind flashed to the obsidian council Varric had mentioned. Could this be their mark? If so, why was it on her family's crest? The questions hung heavily in her mind, unanswered. Kyle stepped beside her, his jaw tightening. "This isn't right," he murmured. Before Aralynn could respond, the door opened. 2 guards stood on the other side, their armor emblazoned with the same new sigil. They started to draw their weapons, but Kyle acted first, his blade flashing in the dim light as he subdued them both with swift precision. Aralynn pushed into the chamber, her eyes immediately falling on her mother. Queen Lysandra stood by the window, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders and her face pale but composed. Beside her was a figure Aralynn hadn't expected to see so soon, Uncle Varric. Varric turned, his piercing gaze landing on Aralynn. His expression was a mix of surprise and something else she couldn't quite place. "Aralynn," he said, stepping forward, "you shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." Queen Lysandra's eyes widened as she took in the sight of her daughter. "Aralynn," she breathed, moving toward her, but Varric placed a hand on her arm, stopping her. "What happened?" Aralynn demanded, her voice sharp. "Why are you here, Uncle? Why is the crest different? And why did you send bounty hunters after me?" Varric's expression softened, though his tone carried an edge of indignation. "A lot has happened since that night, Aralynn. Bounty hunters? You think I sent them after you? Never. That's not who I am. If bounty hunters were involved, it's because of the Council, an organized group working in the shadows, conspiring to destroy our family. They're the ones pulling the strings, spreading chaos across the kingdom." He stepped closer, his voice steady but tinged with a practiced calm. "After your father's death, Solara was on the brink of collapse. The people needed a symbol of strength, and the throne needed stability. I did what had to be done to ensure order was maintained for the good of everyone." "And married my mother?" Aralynn's voice rose, incredulity and anger battling within her. Queen Lysandra stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Varric told me what happened that night, Aralynn," he said. He said you were being manipulated, that the mercenaries who killed your father tricked you into helping them." She paused, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve, a nervous habit Aralynn hadn't seen since she was a child. Her gaze shifted to Varric, lingering as though seeking his approval or reassurance before she continued. Her tone wavered, and for the first time, Aralynn noticed the faint weariness in her mother's posture. The queen's gaze flickered to Varric for a fraction of a second, as though seeking reassurance. Aralynn's chest tightened. Was her mother speaking her own thoughts or merely repeating what Varric had told her? Aralynn's eyes widened, her heart hammering in her chest. Her voice cracked as she exclaimed, "That's a lie! I would never—" But even as the words left her lips, doubt crawled in. How much of this was true, and how much was twisted by the same unseen forces Varric claimed were against them? Her mind raced, questioning every moment since that fateful night. Varric raised a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence, his voice calm but firm. "Enough. The people needed a story they could believe, one that would give them direction. I told them the mercenaries were acting under orders from outside forces and that you were an unwitting pawn in their plans. It was the only way to protect you." He glanced at Queen Lysandra, his tone softening slightly. "And to protect her, too." The shift was deliberate, steering the conversation back to his claimed role as the family's savior. Kyle, standing near the doorway, bristled. "Convenient," he muttered under his breath. Aralynn shot him a warning glance, but doubt began to creep into her mind. "Why didn't you try to find me?" Aralynn asked, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me this?" "Because it wasn't safe," Varric replied, his tone measured but carrying a faint note of exasperation. "The kingdom was in turmoil, and I couldn't risk bringing you back until the people were ready to accept you again. I had to act quickly to stabilize the throne." He took a step closer to Aralynn, his expression earnest, but his words carefully chosen. "Marrying your mother wasn't about power. It was about ensuring the safety of everyone. Everything I've done has been to protect this family, even if it doesn't seem that way now." He gave a faint smile, as if daring her to question him further. Aralynn's head swam with conflicting emotions, each one battling for dominance. Her father's death, her flight, and now this, the altered crest, her mother's alliance with Varric. It was too much. She turned to her mother, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and hurt. "And you believed him?" Queen Lysandra's eyes filled with tears. "He told me you were alive, that you would return when it was safe. I didn't know what else to do." Kyle stepped forward, his voice low but cutting. "Aralynn, something isn't right. None of this adds up." "Kyle." Aralynn's voice was laced with warning, but her resolve wavered. Deep down, a small voice whispered that he might be right. Her trust in Varric, once unwavering, now felt fragile, like a thread stretched too thin. She wanted to believe in the man who had trained her, who had been more of a father to her than her own at times, but the inconsistencies gnawed at her. "Why does this feel rehearsed?" she wondered, glancing between her mother and uncle. Varric's eyes narrowed as he looked at Kyle. "You have something to say, soldier?" Kyle didn't flinch. "Only that you seem very comfortable on the throne for someone who never sought power." "Enough," Aralynn snapped, stepping between them. Her gaze landed on Varric, searching his face for answers. "I need time to think." Varric nodded, his expression unreadable, though his tone carried a subtle edge. "Of course. But Aralynn, remember this. Everything I've done has been for the good of the kingdom. Sacrifices had to be made, difficult decisions taken. Never forget that." He placed a hand on Queen Lysandra's shoulder, as if to emphasize his point. The queen didn't flinch, but her downcast eyes spoke volumes to Aralynn, fueling the unease building in her chest. As they left the chamber, Kyle's words lingered in Aralynn's mind. The inconsistencies in Varric's story gnawed at her, each detail sharpening the edge of her doubt. Why hadn't he tried harder to find her? Why change the crest? And why did her mother's words sound rehearsed? She tried to push the doubts aside, clinging to the image of her uncle as the man who had once been her greatest ally. For now, she needed to focus on reuniting with her mother and finding a way to uncover the truth, even if it meant confronting the possibility that Varric was not the man she thought he was. Chapter 13. The Heirloom Blade. The first rays of dawn broke through the canopy of trees, casting soft golden light across the forest floor. The quiet hum of morning filled the air, chirping birds, the distant rustle of leaves, and the faint trickle of a nearby stream. Aralynn stirred from her makeshift bed of moss and soft leaves, the events of the previous day weighing heavily on her mind. As she sat up, the smell of wood smoke reached her nose. Lyric was crouched near the fire, stoking the embers to life, while Era methodically wrapped a fresh bandage around her staff, murmuring a soft spell under her breath. Aralynn's shoulder still throbbed from the arrow graze, but the pain was nothing compared to the storm in her chest. The glowing sword that had haunted her dreams for weeks, the same one she had sketched so many times in her journal, felt closer than ever, as if the kingdom itself was pulling her toward it. "Morning," Lyric said, glancing up with a faint grin. His voice was light, but his eyes carried a shadow of worry. "Thought I'd let you sleep in for once." Aralynn returned his smile, though hers was faint. "Thanks. I think I needed it." Her gaze shifted to Kyle, who was sharpening his sword nearby, his movements deliberate and precise. Despite the peaceful setting, an undercurrent of tension lingered among them, unspoken but palpable. Aralynn stole a glance at Kyle, watching the sunlight catch on his face as he sharpened his blade. His focus was unwavering, his strong hands moving with practiced ease. Her chest tightened for reasons she couldn't quite name, though she quickly looked away before anyone noticed. "We should move soon," Kyle said without looking up. "The trail to the cave isn't far, but we don't know what else might be waiting for us there." Aralynn nodded, her resolve firming. "Let's eat quickly and head out. The sooner we find out what's there, the sooner we can start piecing this together." The group shared a simple meal of dried bread and fruit before extinguishing the fire and packing their belongings. The journey ahead felt heavy with significance, as though each step carried them closer to answers they weren't entirely ready for. The sun climbed higher as they approached the cave, its entrance partially concealed by overgrown vines and jagged rocks. It loomed before them like a silent sentinel, dark and foreboding. Aralynn felt a strange pull as they neared, an almost magnetic force that made her chest tighten. "This has to be it," Era murmured, clutching the weathered parchment they had recovered from the ruins. The map's faded lines and cryptic symbols had led them here, to this forgotten place shrouded in mystery. Aralynn hesitated at the cave's threshold, her gaze drawn to the darkness within. "Do you feel that?" she asked quietly. Kyle stepped beside her, his hand on his sword hilt. His presence was steadying, a quiet reassurance that she hadn't realized she needed. "What?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. "The air," she said. "It's different. Like it's charged." Era closed her eyes for a moment, extending her hand toward the entrance. Her lips moved in a silent incantation, and when she opened her eyes again, they gleamed with faint light. "She's right. There's old magic here. Protective wards, but they've been dormant for a long time. Whoever sealed this place wanted to make sure it stayed undisturbed." Lyric let out a low whistle. "Guess we're disturbing it now." Kale led the way, his sword drawn, pushing aside the vines that concealed the narrow entrance. He glanced back briefly at Aralynn, his gaze meeting hers for a fleeting moment. "Stay close," he said, the weight of his concern evident. Aralynn nodded, her heart fluttering at the intensity in his eyes. The tunnel beyond was tight, forcing them to walk single file. The air grew cooler as they descended, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the darkness. Their footsteps stirred up a fine layer of dust that hung in the air, illuminated by the flickering light of their torches. The walls of the cave were etched with symbols that glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Ira paused to examine them, her fingers tracing the carvings. "These runes, they're ancient, older than anything I've seen before. They're not just decorative, they're tied to Solara's magic. And look here, these markings mention a magical seal. Only royal blood can pass through it. This must be why the cave and whatever is inside have remained untouched for so long." "What kind of magic?" Lyric asked, glancing nervously at the glowing symbols. "Protective," Era said. "But there's something else. It's faint, but I can feel it, like it's warning us to turn back." Aralynn stepped closer, her gaze fixed ahead. "We're not turning back," she said firmly. "Whatever's in here, it's connected to my family. We need to find it." The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, and the group came to a halt. At its center stood a raised stone pedestal surrounded by a faintly shimmering barrier of light. The magical seal pulsed faintly, as though alive, and the symbols on the walls seemed to react to Aralynn's presence. Era's breath hitched. "That seal, it's royal magic," she whispered. "Only you can break it, Aralynn." Aralynn hesitated, stepping forward cautiously. The barrier rippled as she approached, and when she reached out her hand, the light parted like water. The pedestal was now fully revealed, and atop it rested a magnificent blade. The sword seemed to radiate its own light, the carvings on its hilt gleaming with intricate depictions of the sun and stars. Aralynn's breath caught as she stepped closer, drawn to the weapon. The room felt heavy with purpose, the air thick with unspoken words. Her fingers hovered over the hilt before finally closing around it. The moment she touched it, a rush of warmth spread through her, and the blade seemed to hum faintly in response. Era's voice broke the silence, her tone reverent. "That's no ordinary sword. It's enchanted, bound to the royal family." Kyle stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the blade. "The heirloom blade," he said, his voice low and reverent. "My father told me about this blade when I was a child. He called it a weapon of legend, meant for the true protector of Solara." His gaze shifted to Aralynn, his expression softening. "It's more than a weapon. It's a symbol of justice and light." He turned fully to her, his voice steady. "And it's yours." For a moment their gazes locked, and Aralynn felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the blade in her hands. Aralynn turned the blade in her hands, its weight surprisingly balanced. "Why was it hidden?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lyric's gaze darted to the glowing runes on the walls. "Maybe someone thought it wasn't safe in the palace anymore. Or someone didn't want it to fall into the rightful heir's hands," Kyle added grimly. Aralynn's thoughts turned to Varric, his face appearing unbidden in her mind. The altered crest, the subtle manipulations, the way he always seemed to steer the narrative. Her grip on the hilt tightened. "Do you think he knew about this?" Aralynn hesitated, her grip tightening on the blade. "No. I don't think he even knows where this sword is," she added, her voice quiet but resolute. "If he did, wouldn't he have used it? The heirloom blade's power would solidify his rule, and he'd never let it out of his grasp." Kyle's jaw clenched. "If he did, it's one more reason to doubt his loyalty." Era's voice was gentle but firm. "We can't accuse him without proof. But this blade, it might be the key to finding that proof." Aralynn nodded, sliding the blade into her belt. As her fingers brushed the hilt, she glanced at Kyle. His steady presence gave her courage. "Then we find the truth," she said, her voice steady. "We find out what happened to my father, why the wards are failing, and what Varric is hiding. And if he's betrayed us, he'll answer for it." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Kyle's hand brushed hers as if to silently affirm that he would stand by her side no matter what came next.
The others nodded, their resolve solidifying. Together they left the chamber, the heirloom blade now a part of their journey. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but one thing was clear. Solara's future depended on uncovering the secrets of its past. Chapter 14. Truth Revealed. Aralynn's heart pounded as she and her companions crept through the castle corridors, the heirloom blade at her side. The knowledge of what they had discovered in the hidden cave consumed her thoughts, but it was the implications of Varric's possible betrayal that truly made her blood run cold. She needed to speak to her mother, to warn her before it was too late. The blade hummed softly against her hip, almost as if urging her forward. Every step deeper into the palace felt like walking back into the jaws of the beast that had already taken her father. They reached Queen Lysandra's chambers without incident, Kale's hand on his sword hilt, and Lyric keeping a sharp eye on the shadows. Ira paused at the door, murmuring a soft incantation to ensure no traps or magical wards were in place. Aralynn pushed the door open gently and slipped inside. Queen Lysandra stood by the window, her back to the door, her golden hair catching the faint moonlight. "Mother," Aralynn whispered, her voice trembling, The queen turned, her face a mixture of relief and worry. "Aralynn, thank the gods you're safe. What is going on?" Varric said. Aralynn cut her off, stepping closer. "Mother, I need you to listen to me. I don't think Varric is who he says he is. We've uncovered something that changes everything." Queen Lysandra's expression shifted to confusion. "What are you talking about? Varric has been keeping the kingdom together since your father's death. He's—" "No," Aralynn interrupted. "He's been manipulating everything, the crest, the bounty hunters, the council, and this." She unsheathed the heirloom blade, the weapon's light filling the room with a soft, golden glow. The queen gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Is that—" Queen Lysandra began, her voice trembling. "The blade of legend." "Yes," Aralynn said. "It was hidden, protected by a magical seal. Only someone of our bloodline could retrieve it. Varric didn't even know where it was. I think he's been planning this for years, working with the council to seize power." Before Queen Lysandra could respond, the door burst open. Guards poured in, their weapons drawn, and behind them strode Varric, his face a mask of surprise and barely concealed rage. His gaze locked onto the sword in Aralynn's hands, and for a moment a flicker of fear crossed his face. "So," Varric said, his voice icy, "you found it, the fabled blade, how convenient." He stepped forward, his movements slow but purposeful. "Give it to me, Aralynn. That weapon belongs to the throne." Aralynn's grip on the sword tightened. "It belongs to the true protector of Solara, and that's not you." Varric's expression darkened. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. That blade is more than a weapon, it's a key. A key to power you can't possibly comprehend. Now hand it over." "Never," Aralynn spat. Varric's composure cracked, his voice rising with fury. "Then you leave me no choice." He turned to the guards. "Kill her." The room erupted into chaos. Kale and Lyric sprang into action, their blades clashing against the guards' swords. Ira summoned bursts of light, her magic disorienting the attackers. Aralynn held her ground, the heirloom blade humming with energy as she fought with a precision and strength she hadn't known she possessed. Each swing of the blade sent arcs of golden light through the air, but even with its power, the guards were relentless. Then Varric moved. His speed was inhuman, a blur of shadow and motion that left faint, dark trails in his wake, as if the shadows themselves obeyed his will. Each step he took seemed unnaturally fluid, his form barely visible before reappearing several paces ahead. Aralynn froze, her breath catching in her throat as recognition struck her like a hammer. The haunting movements, the sinister presence, it was unmistakable. This was the same figure she had seen that fateful night, the one cloaked in darkness who had driven a blade into her father's heart. The air seemed colder around him, a palpable malice that pressed against her chest, suffocating and relentless. A surge of fury and dread washed over her, her grip on the heirloom blade tightening as the truth crashed over her like a wave. "Varric," she shouted, her voice trembling with fury and fear. "You were the one who killed him. You killed my father that night." Her words rang out across the chamber, filled with raw anguish and defiance. She turned toward her mother, her eyes desperate. "Mother, it was him. He's the one who murdered father." He turned to her, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light. "I told you, Aralynn, you don't understand what you're dealing with." He lunged at her, his movements a terrifying blend of speed and precision. Aralynn barely managed to block his strike, the impact sending a jarring vibration through her arms. He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed in the chamber. Kale saw Varric's attention shift to Aralynn and moved to intercept. "Get away from her!" He roared, charging forward with his sword raised. His strikes were fierce and calculated, each swing aimed to push Varric back and give Aralynn room to regroup. Varric dodged effortlessly, his movements blurring into streaks of shadow that left Kale swinging at air more often than flesh. The mocking smirk on Varric's face deepened as he deflected Kale's blade with a flick of his wrist, countering with speed that barely gave Kale time to react. "Is that all you've got?" Varric taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. Kale growled, adjusting his stance and unleashing a series of rapid strikes, his blade cutting through the air with deadly precision. For a moment, it seemed he had gained the upper hand, forcing Varric to retreat a few steps. Aralynn joined the fray, the heirloom blade gleaming as she attacked Varric from the other side. Together, she and Kale moved in sync, their strikes coordinated, a deadly rhythm that might have overwhelmed any ordinary opponent. But Varric was far from ordinary. His movements were impossibly fast, his blade weaving through their attacks like a serpent. Every time they thought they had him cornered, he slipped away with unnatural ease, his laughter echoing in the chamber. Kale lunged, aiming a powerful thrust at Varric's chest, but the dark figure sidestepped effortlessly. As he dodged, Varric raised his hand, revealing a glowing ring on his finger. The eerie light from the ring pulsed, casting unsettling shadows across the chamber. Aralynn's eyes widened in shock as Varric's laughter echoed through the room. "You think you can defeat me with that trinket?" Varric taunted, nodding toward the heirloom blade. "Allow me to show you what true power looks like." The ring flared with dark energy, sending a shockwave that knocked Kale and Aralynn off balance. Varric advanced, his movements now even faster, bolstered by the ring's magic. Kale, recovering quickly, placed himself between Varric and Aralynn. "Stay back, Aralynn," he shouted, his voice strained as he deflected a flurry of strikes. Varric's expression darkened. "Foolish," he hissed, his tone low and menacing. The ring pulsed again, a tendril of dark energy lashing out and throwing Kale off his footing. As Kale stumbled back, Varric turned his attention to Aralynn. "You truly think this relic of yours can defeat me?" He sneered, his voice echoing with malevolent energy. "The power I wield surpasses anything your family could imagine." He raised his hand, the ring glowing brighter with an otherworldly intensity. Aralynn lunged, the heirloom blade shining brilliantly as she struck with all her might. The golden light clashed with Varric's dark energy, sending sparks flying as the chamber trembled. For a moment it seemed as if she might overpower him, the blade cutting through the shadowy tendrils that erupted from his ring. But Varric laughed, a hollow, chilling sound that reverberated through the room. "Impressive," he admitted. "But you're still a child playing with a weapon you barely understand." With a surge of power from the ring, he deflected her attack, sending her staggering back. Lyric and Ira charged in to assist, Ira summoning bursts of light that shattered against Varric's defenses while Lyric's blades flashed in precise arcs. Despite their combined effort, Varric was unstoppable. His ring's power seemed to grow with each passing second, the dark energy it emitted swallowing Ira's magic and nullifying their attacks. He moved with impossible speed, countering Lyric's strikes and knocking him aside with a single, devastating blow. Kale regained his footing and joined Aralynn, the two of them striking in perfect synchrony. Their blades danced with fury and precision, pushing Varric further into the room. But the ring pulsed again, and Varric unleashed another wave of dark energy that shattered their momentum. Kale stepped in front of Aralynn as Varric prepared a final blow, his blade glowing with a sinister, pulsing energy. "Stay back," Kale shouted, determination etched into his face. He deflected one strike, then another, but Varric's power was too much. Finally, with an almost casual motion, Varric drove his blade into Kale's chest. Kale gasped, his sword slipping from his hand as he staggered backward. "Kale!" Aralynn screamed, her heart shattering as she watched him collapse. As Aralynn rushed to his side, Varric stood over them, the ring's glow illuminating his cruel smile. "It's over," he said coldly, raising his blade to strike Aralynn down. "Stop!" Queen Lysandra's voice cut through the chaos, trembling but commanding. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on Varric. "You don't know the whole truth, Aralynn. He can't kill you, not if he values his own power and bloodline." Varric turned to her, his expression flickering with surprise. "What are you talking about?" Lysandra took a shaky breath. "Aralynn, you are Varric's daughter, not the king's. You carry his bloodline." Her voice broke, but she pressed on. "I know because, Varric and we were lovers before I married the king. I kept the truth buried to protect you, to shield you from the consequences of not being the king's true heir." "You were always meant to be stronger than either of us," Lysandra said, her tears glistening. That blade chose you, Aralynn, because of the strength and power in your bloodline. Varric's face twisted with rage and confusion, his expression flickering between anger and a dark, calculating amusement. He froze for a moment, then slowly lowered his blade, his eyes narrowing as a cruel smile curled across his lips. The glow of the ring on his hand dimmed slightly as he stepped closer to Aralynn, his tone now eerily calm and coaxing. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed, Aralynn," he said, his voice low and persuasive. "You've seen what I'm capable of. You felt the power of this ring," Varric said, his tone growing smoother, more persuasive. "And now you know the truth. You are my daughter, Aralynn. My blood runs through your veins, and together we could reshape this realm into something glorious. Stand with me, and we can claim the power that is our birthright. The heirloom blade and this ring were always meant to work together, just as we were." "You have to go," Kale rasped, his voice weak but resolute, though his eyes held a softness meant only for her. "Protect Solara, protect the blade." Aralynn's tears blurred her vision as she clutched his hand. "Kale, I can't leave you like this. You've always been there for me, always protected me." "And I'll protect you now, even if it's the last thing I do," Kale whispered, his voice growing weaker but still resolute. He forced a small, pained smile. "You've been more than a princess to me, Aralynn. You've been my strength, my hope." Her breath hitched as she leaned closer, her hand trembling as she brushed his cheek. "I need you to stay. I need you with me." "You're stronger than you know," Kale said, his hand tightening briefly around hers before the strength began to fade. "You'll lead Solara to a brighter future. I believe in you." "Kale," Aralynn's voice broke, her heart shattering as his gaze began to dim. He managed one final, tender look before his grip slackened, his hand falling away. Aralynn's tears spilled freely as she whispered, "I'll never give in. I promise." Tears streamed down Aralynn's face as she nodded, her heart breaking. "I won't," she whispered. Aralynn stood, her grip tightening on the heirloom blade as she stared down Varric, her fury and resolve burning brightly. She locked eyes with him, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You will never be my father," she said, her tone laced with defiance. "This ends now." Before she could charge, Queen Lysandra, seeing the battle turning against them, stepped forward, placing herself between Aralynn and Varric. "Aralynn, you have to leave. Now." "But—" "No," the queen shouted, her voice firm. "You are no match for him, Aralynn, and you are the kingdom's last hope. Go." As the remaining guards closed in, Queen Lysandra placed herself between them and Aralynn, a determined look in her eyes. "I'll hold them off." Ira grabbed Aralynn's arm, pulling her toward the door. "We have to go," she urged. Aralynn hesitated, her gaze lingering on her mother. "I'll come back for you," she promised, her voice breaking. "Go," the queen shouted again. With Lyric and Ira at her side, Aralynn fled the chamber, her heart shattering with every step. The sound of steel clashing and her mother's defiant shouts echoed behind her, but she didn't look back. As they disappeared into the night, the weight of her loss threatened to crush her, but she held on to the heirloom blade, its light a small beacon in the growing darkness. The path ahead was uncertain, but Aralynn knew one thing: she would return. And when she did, Varric would pay for everything he had done.